Good evening, everybody. Good evening, and welcome to tonight's Books and Coffee discussion. I'm Emma Oxford, Director of Community Relations, and I'd like to extend a special welcome to some of our students who are here tonight, and also to our members of the Friends of Concordia. It's your generosity that helps to support programs like this and enable us to offer them free to the community. Tonight, we're actually marking the beginning of the 30th year of the Books and Coffee series. So if you didn't fill out one of the purple raffle cards on your way in, could you raise your hand and we'll get one to you now? That's a way for us to have your contact information and for you to have a chance at winning a raffle prize, which will be a copy of tonight's book. Andrew, could you pass out the cards? Raise your hand if you didn't fill out a card before. So I am very excited to welcome the author of The Facebook Effect to Concordia tonight. Just next week, the much anticipated movie, The Social Network, will be released. New York Magazine described it as the movie Facebook doesn't want you to see. And our guest speaker has called it horrifically unfair. Well, tonight you have a very special opportunity to hear the true story of the origins and growth of the worldwide phenomenon that we know as Facebook. David Kirkpatrick researched and wrote this New York Times bestseller, The Facebook Effect, with the full cooperation of the company's founder, Mark Zuckerberg. David's gripping account of how Facebook grew from a Harvard dorm room project to a global site with 500 million users is essential reading. David Kirkpatrick was for many years the senior editor for Internet and Technology at Fortune magazine, which he joined in 1983. He authored numerous cover stories, including ones on Microsoft, IBM, Apple, Sun, and Intel, and he also wrote regular technology features and a weekly column. He's a contributor to Vanity Fair magazine, and in the October issue, you can read his exclusive profile of Facebook's founding president, known as Bad Boy Sean Parker, the character portrayed by Justin Timberlake in the Facebook movie, The Social Network. And with former Fortune colleagues, David has formed a media company called Techonomy that organizes conferences about technology and innovation. He is a member of the World Economic Forum's International Media Council and of the Council on Foreign Relations. David, your book delves deep into Mark Zuckerberg's thinking, all sorts of interesting concepts. The gift economy, transparency, social streams. I can't wait to hear your perspective on some of the issues that you write about whether Facebook is going to someday become a giant surveillance system, or whether it really is, more benignly, the public square for the global village. David will talk for 20 to 30 minutes, and then we'll take questions from the audience. And please keep those brief so that we can include as many of you as possible. David, thank you so much for coming, and welcome.
Thank you, Emma. Thanks a lot, Emma. It's interesting you said the thing about the public square for the global village, because one of the things that I have kind of realized since I finished the book, and if I'd thought about this, I would have had it in the book. Some of you may have heard that in the last year, for the first time, the majority of humankind lives in cities. This just happened this past 12 months. And that's actually a pretty big deal, because the history of human life is that we live in villages and small towns. That's still the way a lot of people live. But isn't it interesting that at the exact moment when the majority of people are living in cities, we've seen the emergence of a technology that basically gives us the same kind of visibility into our friends' lives and the same ability to sort of be in everybody's business that we used to have over the back fence or listening into the hut next door in every town in the world. That is the way most of our predecessors lived, with no privacy, effectively. So it isn't entirely inappropriate that a technology has emerged like this. So anyway, why did I write a book about Facebook? That's kind of a way of one way of thinking about it. I really do think it's a phenomenon of a scale that you don't see very often. It's a business phenomenon and a technology phenomenon that is having an extraordinary impact on the nature of human life. And it's an impact that's being felt far more than just in our own country. I mean, Americans know that Facebook started at Harvard and it was for high school and college kids, and it seems like just sort of part of the landscape, and but in fact, it only about less than 30% of Facebook's members are in the United States. The third largest country for Facebook is Indonesia. The fourth largest is Turkey. So in Indonesia, there's close to 30 million members of Facebook. And that's a pretty big deal. And it's very big in Venezuela, in Chile, in Estonia, in South Africa. And for many of these countries, particularly places like Egypt or Iran or Bangladesh, countries which do not have the same kind of tradition of freedom of speech and open public discourse that we have, it's had an extraordinary impact on the nature of public discourse because it does empower the individual. And that's one of the reasons why, I actually wrote the book and I start the book with an anecdote, since Emma's actually obviously read the book, which is very nice. It doesn't always happen. She will recall the book starts out with a chapter which really, for the first 10 pages, is not really even about Facebook. It's about a young guy in Colombia who used Facebook to express his dissatisfaction and his unhappiness with the FARC guerrilla movement. And at 3 a.m. one night in January of 2008, got so angry with FARC that he created a group saying, down with FARC, no more killing, no more lies, no more kidnappings. This is a group that had basically been tormenting the country for decades. But it wasn't common to be willing to speak out against FARC. And the fact that because they're really brutal, and people were cowed by them. But this guy just said, enough is enough because of some things that were going on, and he created a group, an anti-FARC group, and at 3 a.m. he went to bed. He had 100 friends on Facebook, and he invited them all to join the group. So he woke up the next morning, and there were 1,000 members of the group. And so, that was surprising to him. And though he went to the beach, because it was the holidays, and he came back, and there were like 3,000 members of the group. So he realized he had hit a nerve, and he really started focusing on this group. And within a month to the day after he created the group, that group led to the biggest demonstration, I think, probably in recent world history, where 10 million people went into the streets of Colombia protesting FARC. And actually, there were demonstrations at the same time on the same day in like 30 or 40 cities around the world of Colombians and people who were sympathetic to Colombia. So that's an odd thing, That's something that, you don't really think Facebook would have that effect, because we all think of it as something that was invented so teenagers can agree to meet later at the mall, right? And it does do that, and that is why people join it, is in order to have a more efficient, simple communication with the friends they already know. And that it was designed to communicate with people you already know, and people join it, typically students and also older people, and they use it that way. They use it to connect with people they know. But what's interesting, and what I think is one of the things that really drew me to it and caused me to begin the book that way, was that once you join this system, aiming to get an easier way to meet your friends at the mall, you actually have acquired a new kind of communications power. And most members of Facebook don't think of it this way, and most observers of Facebook don't think of it this way. But as I mentioned before, I really think the basic way to think of Facebook is as a tool for the empowerment of its users. Because basically what happens on Facebook is that everyone is a broadcaster. You know, I grew up, I'm a baby boomer, I grew up when, you know, Walter Cronkite was like the voice of God. He was the one who defined the news, and, you know, a few people like that were the filter through which all information was disseminated. But today, we are all Walter Cronkite. And that's because of Facebook and other systems like it, Twitter and plenty of other things. And it's not just like email. Email is fine. Email is electronic communications, but it's basically just an electronic version of a letter. In fact, almost all forms of communication that preceded Facebook have this in common, which is that you initiate an outbound communication to another person. You know, you willfully send a message, whether it's a telegram or an instant message or email or a letter, whatever. But Facebook is different because Facebook is actually automated communication. Facebook is a way where rather than sending a message to somebody else, you simply do something on Facebook. You say, I'm going to the mall. And because your friends have proclaimed themselves to be your friends on Facebook and you have agreed, yes, I'm your friend, what they're doing in effect by making that statement is they're subscribing to information about you. So then when you say, I'm going to the mall, you don't say, send it to Emma, who's my friend on Facebook. I think you're my friend on Facebook. It just happens. You just say, I'm going to the mall. And Emma sees it because that pre-established connection already existed. And in fact, Facebook is very sophisticated software, much more sophisticated than most people realize. So it actually determines, through quite complex algorithmic methods, who should see that information. So for example, I have 1,000 friends on Facebook, which I'm not proud of, but I have a lot of friends, and when I put a status update, all 1,000 friends do not see, you know, whatever I said. The ones who see it typically are those who have looked at things and commented on things I've said before, or who have recently visited my profile, or by some other method shown Facebook software that they are interested in me, because you know, there's so many people on Facebook now, they have to find a way to filter that information. But if you think about that, that is a highly automated communication. And it's something completely new. We've never seen it before. So, you know, I just want to really emphasize that the political impact, the empowerment, these are big deals that I wanted to write the book because I think this is perhaps the most impactful company of our era. And I don't think most people understand it. But the reason I was able to do that is that I got to know Mark Zuckerberg. And he's the guy who created this thing. He's going to be one of the main characters in the movie, which is premiering tomorrow, called The Social Network. And I first met him in September of 2006. And I tell the story in the book of how I met him for lunch. And he came and sat at the table at this restaurant in Midtown Manhattan. And he was so young that I almost didn't believe that he was the CEO of a company with, at that time, 9 million users. I mean, it was almost laughable. He had his T-shirt, his sandals, and yet he was the guy who did it. And so I'm sort of like suppressing a smirk, and he starts talking, and everything he said at that lunch was pretty amazing. I mean, he really blew me away when he started explaining the way he saw the service that he was operating, because he clearly viewed it in very big terms. And he really saw it then, and he sees it now, in terms not dissimilar to the ones I was using before. He realizes that it's a new form of communication. He realizes that it's about empowering people, and he believes that it's something that should be made available to everyone. So, you know, to bring it into the present for a minute, Facebook has announced 500 million users. They probably actually have more like 550 million now. But to Mark Zuckerberg, that's not an impressive number. He really thinks Facebook should be for literally everyone on the planet. And that is the goal to which he devotes his life. And he's not really going to be satisfied until he's given that his best shot. Now, he'll never get everybody on the planet, obviously. But if you look at Facebook's growth, it's pretty amazing that in 6.5 years, it's already gotten to 550 million people, and nothing's ever grown that fast before. The only things that are even close to that are YouTube and Skype, and in terms of active users, they never got to that level in that short of a time. So, in a way, my book is a biography of Mark Zuckerberg, and I can't really tell you all the amazing stories in the short time that I have up here tonight, but just suffice it to say that I became convinced at that lunch and in continuing a conversation with him afterwards that he really was one of the great visionaries of our era. And I really do believe now that actually, just in the last few weeks, I've started to realize, in a way, he's the closest thing to a global leader we have. I know that sounds crazy, but we live in a world that does not have very many leaders of consequence. I mean, there's hardly anybody who really has global stature. And despite the fact that we live in you have Bill Clinton, Muhammad Ali's getting a little old. There are just not many people who are respected all over the world. But here's this kid, he's 26 years old, and he's creating the service that people are voting with their time that they really believe in, and he's doing it for them. And this is something I'm still formulating, to be honest, and I didn't say that in the book. But I really do think, and even the fact that he's giving $100 million to Newark Public Schools, which you might have seen just kind of was in the news today, he's starting to think of himself as a role model in a bigger way. And I think the movie actually is going to play a big role in making him a bigger public figure, which is odd, by the way, because Facebook is really down on the movie. They would love it if none of you saw the movie. They think the movie is a gross distortion, and it is, of the story of Facebook. It's not the true story of Facebook at all. But it's a very good movie, and it does, not that I've seen it, because they don't want me to see it, because they think I'm going to criticize it too much. But I'll see it when it comes out next week. But the fact is, it's a movie that basically says this guy, Mark Zuckerberg, matters, and Sean Parker matters, who was his partner in creating Facebook, who's played, as Emma mentioned, by Justin Timberlake. And I think that's a really good thing, because I think people should be thinking about who this guy is. And if it takes a slightly distorted movie to make people aware of his existence, I think that's great, because even though I wrote a book about it that's a serious work of journalism, it hasn't gotten the kind of readership that this movie's going to get, let's face it. So anyway, I don't want to talk too long, but I wanted to just, touch on a couple of other issues. You've heard a lot about privacy with Facebook, and it really is a big problem. And it's a problem really for two reasons. It's a problem in the sense, it's a problem on Facebook's part, because really this software is not sophisticated enough considering the way we actually want to use it. So Facebook doesn't really allow us to interact with people the way we really do in the real world. So for example, we have our family, we have our best friends, we have our work friends, we have and the people, our colleagues, and we have the people we just friended on Facebook because we couldn't say no. And basically, there's a whole bunch of other categories. But just think of those four. You want to see a completely different set of information about each of those groups. And you also want each of those groups to see a completely different set of information about you. But Facebook doesn't make that very easy. What Facebook does, it has controls that enable that. But they're quite hard to find and use, and also they're not dynamic enough because, in fact, the nature of our relationships with people change a lot. And we really should be using a service, if it's going to be automated communication, that allows us to basically almost in real time move people from one group to another, because that's sort of the way we do it in our heads when we're relating to people in the real world. So in that sense, Facebook is still a very crude tool. But the other, and I think I fault them, frankly, on not working hard enough to build better group functionality. And I recently was on stage with Zuckerberg at a place called the Computer History Museum in Silicon Valley. And I said this to him in front of a couple hundred people. And he said they are making a priority to improve that. And it's interesting, periodically you hear people talk about what could hurt Facebook, what competition might emerge, and one thing that's often discussed is what Google might do to try to create its own social network. And if you read or listen to what the people at Google say, and they are going to do it, by the way, they're going to take YouTube and Gmail and all the things they control and try to somehow knit it into a competitor for Facebook. Nobody knows exactly how, except for the people there who are working on it. But one thing they have said in all of their public statements is one of the things they know they have to do right is very sophisticated group functionality. One of the reasons that is a problem, for example, companies all over the world would love to be able to use Facebook for their employees, because it's actually a very good tool for collaboration and for communication inside the enterprise. But no company at the moment is really willing to let their employees use it for anything really serious, because they can't be confident that something you send to your friend, even your work friend, about your job doesn't leak out to some other friend who might work for your competitor. That's the way Facebook is structured today. So there's a lot of problems with that. But the other big piece of the problem of privacy in Facebook is really directly in your lap, and even my lap, and all of us. The way we use Facebook invites privacy violations. And the reason for that is that almost all of us have way more friends on Facebook than we really have in the real world. And, as I said at the beginning, Facebook was intended as a system to communicate with people you already knew in the real world. So by that logic, you really shouldn't be friends on Facebook with anybody you wouldn't recognize if they walked through that door. But, let me just try. How many people in here are on Facebook? Okay. How many people of you who are on Facebook would recognize every friend of yours on Facebook when they walk through that door? I don't believe it, but that's still only half. Okay. In any case, you're not typical, those of you who raised your hands, because most people have way more friends on Facebook than they really know. It's become a competition, particularly for young people, to have more friends than your other friend. And for people in my generation, for older people, it's considered kind of rude not to accept a friend request on Facebook. And so really this problem compounds itself. And my feeling is that's probably not ever going to be remedied. So the only way to remedy it is with better software from Facebook, because if you really had good group functionality where you really had ironclad walls between what you shared with the people you really care about and what you shared with the people who you barely know, then you could use Facebook more effectively. Because really the real consequence, in my opinion, and probably this doesn't apply as much to the students in the room, because you're basically, in general, everything's out on the table for you people. That's just the way you live. And it's not the way people in my generation live, but I have an 18-year-old daughter, and I know how it is, and I've studied this, and young people don't feel that concerned about their privacy, and that's partly because they don't have a job yet, partly because they just believe it doesn't matter as much, etc. But the reality is, particularly if you do care about your privacy, that because of all these issues that I mentioned, what you end up sharing on Facebook is basically lowest common denominator kind of stuff. Because if you can't really control who sees what you put on there, the only thing you're going to put on there is something you don't mind if everybody sees. And even though I love Facebook, I think Facebook is a huge innovation. It is changing the world. In general, I think that's a serious weakness that it has as a service. And if it doesn't fix it over time, it's going to get less important. Because, really, if you're going to use a communications tool to communicate with other people, you should be able to communicate with the people you really care about the things you care most about, whether it's a sensitive political issue or something deeply personal. In my opinion, if you're putting sensitive political stuff, you're a political radical, or if you're putting deeply personal information on Facebook, you're making a mistake, because somebody's going to see it who you don't want to have see it. That's just a fact. And we hear a lot of discussion in the adult community about photos that young people have on Facebook, and the famed drunken party photo, or worse, taking a toke on a bong or whatever. There's a lot of those photos on Facebook, and typically they're not even put up by you. They're put up by your quote-unquote friends. because the only person who can tag you in a photo on Facebook is somebody you've accepted as your friend. So if they put up a photo of you, doing something that you'd rather not have the world know, and they tag you, that's to some extent your responsibility for having made them your friend, and it's between you and them. Anyway, I want to really leave quite a bit of time for discussion, but I wanted to just briefly talk about Facebook's future. There's so many other issues that we could touch on, but Facebook's future is not, in the opinion of Zuckerberg and the leaders of the company, what you would expect. Because what you probably would expect is that Facebook.com will grow bigger and bigger and bigger, and pretty soon many billions of people would hopefully have profiles on Facebook.com, and we'd all be going there and playing Farmville and whatever else for the rest of our lives. But the vision they have at Facebook is quite different from that. At Facebook, they actually hope and believe over time you will spend less time at Facebook.com, that over time you may not even think of yourself as using Facebook. Because what they're trying to do is to take the software that they developed and create a platform that is used by any website. And basically, they're doing a pretty darn good job of it. They started turning Facebook into a platform for applications created by other companies in May of 2007. And initially, those were just applications inside the service, like Farmville, or all the games that have become so popular. And gaming has become, after looking at photos, the most popular activity in Facebook. But what they did this year was they made a very big announcement in the spring that all the services that were available to inside Facebook are now basically available outside. So if you have your own website, you can put the like button on there, Facebook Connect, and other parts of the Facebook, what they call the Open Graph API, which is all the pieces of Facebook's software platform. And you can basically allow people to do things on your website anywhere in the world and have that activity flow back into Facebook. So that if Emma has her own, EmmaOxford.com, and she has a like button on something, there, I can click that like button, and then anybody who's my friend on Facebook is likely to see that in their newsfeed inside Facebook, that I clicked the like button on Emma's site, that I liked whatever. That's just the most elementary example of that. There's all kinds of activity and behavior that is increasingly happening outside of Facebook, and there's over 1 million websites that now have incorporated elements of this platform, and some that have done it very aggressively are places like CNN, the Huffington Post, and other media sites. But what really ultimately is going to happen, and has started to happen with far fewer places, but will happen, is that the consumption of that information, which today still is primarily inside Facebook, the news feed, which is where you see the information about your friends, that itself will be outside of Facebook. It already can be. I don't know if any of you are sort of power users of Twitter, but a typical power user of Twitter uses typically something called TweetDeck, which is an application to consume Twitter. Now you can actually see your Facebook newsfeed in TweetDeck. So there's an example of that happening right now, and there's other sites that do that too. So in other words, Facebook, what does Facebook do in its essence, in the opinion of Mark Zuckerberg? It maintains your profile and all the data about you, and it maintains a record of all the connections you have to other people, which they call the social graph. And basically, those are the only two things they want to do long term. And the reason they don't want to do all this other stuff, like have a photo service and gaming and whatever else, is because, they are realistic about the pace of innovation on the internet. And they know they can't out-innovate all the other companies that are going to do all the other things that happen on top of your social information. But they also know that they're so big, and they are the only company that has a network of relationships between individuals. They're the only company or any entity that has this network of this so-called social graph. That is a very, very precious asset that they should build, and they want to build. And if they can do that and keep building that, and they'll still have more and more users creating their profile in there and establishing their connections with other people. But somebody keeps calling me from CNN there. Sorry about that. Then they have an even more powerful asset. Because basically what they will have become at that point is part of the infrastructure of the internet, and it will become extremely difficult to dislodge them. Now, it raises all kinds of tough questions. You know, if there's going to be an identity registry for the world, should it be controlled by one company? Maybe not. But if you say no, who should control such a thing? Should the ITU, the communications part of the UN, control it? Should the government control it? Should, Visa control it? I mean, you don't have a lot of choices. But yet, you can almost pretty much conclude that it is beneficial to the world to have this kind of infrastructure. So we're faced with a lot of interesting and challenging questions about how this thing evolves going forward. And one final point about that platform strategy and sinking below the surface. The way it works, like if Emma has her website with the like button, is, when I go there and I'm clicking the like button on Emma's site, Facebook knows that I'm at her site, right? So if they wanted to, they could say to her, why don't you let us sell an ad and put it on your site when David goes there, because we can target that ad in a way better than anybody can, because we have all this data about these people. And as these millions of websites on the internet increasingly embrace Facebook's platform, it gives Facebook this opportunity to essentially compete with Google in this service that Google has called AdSense, which is one of their two major profit centers, which is their way of distributing ads on websites all over the world. And Facebook could do that much better than Google if they ever took the step that I just said, which they've been downplaying. They haven't ever talked about it publicly because they don't really want to make that too big of a deal. But believe me, all those websites that participate in the Facebook platform will have a real incentive to do that, because they'll be able to make more money by selling ads on their site if they can target those ads more effectively to the person who's visiting. Because a generic ad that's just like a billboard that anybody who happens to be going by will see is worth a lot less than an ad that's targeted specifically for David Kirkpatrick, who's 57 years old and lives in Lower Manhattan and is interested in X, Y, and Z. And that is the holy grail of advertising. So Facebook has a huge opportunity there over the long term. And I could talk a lot about the money side, because there's a lot to say about how Zuckerberg has not really pursued monetization, as they say. He hasn't really pursued making Facebook a huge profit center, because he has focused instead on allowing it to grow, because he believes it's much more important for it to get bigger than it is for it to be profitable in the short term. And he's lucky that they've been able to make enough money all along the way to pay for their expenses. And they'll probably make a little more this year. They'll probably have revenue of almost $1.5 billion. That's enough to pay. That sounds like a lot, but when you're serving 550 million people, most of whom are on there every day, you got to have a lot of servers. They're building a new server farm in Oregon, which is going to cost them several $100 million. So, that's the scale of activity they're involved with. But they're not as worried about making money as they are with growing the service. And it all flows from Zuckerberg. And I guess just the last thing, in case somebody doesn't ask me about this, that I want to say, when you look at Facebook, it is really important to understand Zuckerberg, because this is a very unusual company in that one person has absolute control and authority. That's very unusual in any startup. A venture capital funded startup, which this happens to be, most of the time the investors control the company. But in the case of Facebook, because of Sean Parker, who I wrote this profile about in Vanity Fair, because he hated venture capitalists so much because he had felt screwed by them in two earlier companies he had been involved in. And he knew enough about how finance worked, and because Facebook had so much momentum, Sean was able to convince the venture capitalists to accept a structure that gave Mark control of the board, which he still has to this day. So there's 5 board seats at Facebook. Mark controls 3 of them, which means nothing can happen at that company without this 126-year-old agreeing with it. So everything that happens at Facebook is because Mark Zuckerberg wants it, and it's important to keep that in mind. So anyway, that's enough thoughts from me. Let's have some
David,
discussion.
thank you very much. We've got a couple of microphones. So I'm sure there are going to be lots of questions, and would you raise your hand if you have a question, and please try and keep your questions brief so that we can include quite a few, and we will, David, if you could watch who has the mic, and that's the person who'll get the next question. Do we have some questions over here?
Over here? No.
Yep. Okay. Nice. Yes.
Speak into
Okay,
it.
I just want to know why Facebook haven't used video chat yet, because I
Video
really
chat?
yes.
I'll tell you, the main reason is that it takes a lot of server capacity. I mean, if you know, that's a lot. Video is much more data intensive than text, obviously. And so, you know, if you're going to have a video chat service, you have to have a really even bigger infrastructure and many, many more servers and much more robust networking equipment and all the things that you need in the back end. Because, you know, video is the most data-intense kind of information that passes over the internet. So I'm sure you will see them have that over time. Whether they do that themselves or a platform partner does it at the outset, I really couldn't predict. But it will be there, but it's something that they have to be very careful about because of just how expensive it is to provide that service. And especially if you think about it, that this is a truly global service. If there are, you know, 30 million people in Indonesia and 15 million in Malaysia and 5 million in Vietnam and 15 million in Venezuela, and all these people, you know, want to chat with each other or whatever, that's very complicated for them. At the moment, all their servers are in the United States, which is an interesting thing too, which actually is something of a problem for them. So the way they have to distribute their information now is they contract with all these companies like Akamai, whose business is sort of caching internet data remotely, and then you're basically interacting with Akamai, not Facebook, if you're trying to use it in Indonesia.
Question over the far side?
Yes, you mentioned that young people, everything is out there, and they don't seem to be too concerned about privacy. It's not a major priority. But I know of at least one situation where a young man did not get the job because of his Facebook. Now, I mean, he probably knew nothing about that. He was incredibly qualified, incredibly competent, but he didn't get the job because another young individual who was on the committee said, well, let's see if he has a Facebook, and they didn't like his Facebook.
That's actually quite common, and it happens with college admissions as well. But it actually, if you talk to a lot of young people about this sort of thing, it doesn't generally worry them as much as it should, in my opinion. The way a lot of them tend to look at it, and everybody's different, but the way a lot of young people tend to look at it is, you know, by the time I really enter the workforce, the person hiring me is probably going to have drunken photos on Facebook too. And you know what? They're probably right. And in fact, what many people believe, and this is sort of another new thing that I've been thinking about, is this question of whether we're really kind of in the midst of a kind of fundamental social transformation in terms of transparency and privacy. And that all of us, no matter what our age, are kind of being drawn somewhat unwillingly into the world of the young, where everything is out there. And after all, you know, it isn't entirely illogical, because even though we haven't really liked to think about it, for some time, an extraordinary amount of data about us has been controlled by corporations and credit rating agencies and credit card companies. You know, they know the government, you know, basically, if somebody really wants to know about us, no matter who they are, they can find out today. What Facebook does is it makes it a little easier for the ordinary Joe to do that. But to some extent, privacy was lost some time ago because of the nature of capitalism and banking and all the other, the interconnected electronic, you know, economy in which we live, which is not necessarily a good thing. But it's kind of like that train has left the station, and I think a lot of young people intuitively kind of realize that. So they say, well, if on top of all the thing Experian and, you know, TransUnion have about me, also my friends know that I got drunk at a party the other night, who cares? You know?
Another question over here.
What's your opinion on how Facebook's going to help prevent identity theft?
Well, the kind of identity theft that's really most problematic is when someone gets your credit card information. And, you can't really do that on Facebook. So, really Facebook is not a place for identity theft in the conventional sense of the term. Because you can't really get that. What you can do is this is starting to happen. So in a way, I'm going to contradict myself. There's so many things going on in Facebook that every day I have to change my thinking about some of this stuff. But I just heard a story the other day, trying to remember exactly how it went. A bunch of criminals in Eastern Europe targeted a specific company for, they wanted to basically get into their servers and steal data, probably including credit card numbers. So what they did was they figured out the name of the assistant to the CEO. And then they somehow figured out what high school she went to. And then they created a fake profile on Facebook with someone who went to that high school and saying, oh, you remember when we were in freshman English class and blah, 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 blah. And she clicked friend, right? Then they had access to all this information about her. Then they used that information to figure out what her password was for her corporate network. Because if you know enough about people and you're smart, you can kind of start figuring out a lot of things. And I forget, there were a few other steps in that equation, but in the end, they got deep inside that corporation because of data they'd taken from the woman. But it wasn't really identity theft in the classic sense, but the point is, that can happen. And Facebook can't really do that much about it, I don't think. So I don't think we're going to be able to prevent identity theft very easily. I think what you really have to do is keep your financial information really, really well protected. And by the way, if you don't have like a 10-digit multi-character numbers and letters password for your online bank account, you should change it so that you do, because, which I probably don't even have. But the fact is, those are the systems to be worried about. And the way somebody would use your data from Facebook is to go after that stuff, because it's money they want,
Question from that side of the house?
I read somewhere, and I don't have the details, but I read something about someone being sued because they had friended someone on Facebook. This person was a journalist, and because they had friended sources, someone at a company who competed with those sources portrayed it as conflict of interest. So, what are the dangers for people in business friending, or journalists, for example, friending sources and then being accused of conflict of interest, writing about their, writing about their friends?
I have no clue. That's a new one on me. The bottom line of that would be that, your behavior on Facebook and the nature of your relationships there, which are generally visible or often visible, certainly completely visible to the people you accept as your friends, can reveal a lot about you. And actually at Facebook, the way they look at that sort of thing, at least some of the people, and I talk about this in the book, is that they really feel that the existence of this transparency that Facebook facilitates and is sort of emblematic of in modern life makes people more honest. And one of the things they like to say is that high school kids cheat on their boyfriends and girlfriends less than they used to. Because now in Facebook, they've got to say, are you in a relationship or not, right? And if you're trying to hit on some chick at a party, the first thing they're going to do is go to your Facebook, and they're going to see if you're in a relationship. And any young person here is going to agree. This is the first thing you do when you think you might be finding somebody new, right, is you go to their Facebook. Okay, nodding over here. So basically, that is the way it works. So, they think at Facebook that's great. It prevents misbehavior. Now, everybody has their own opinion about that.
Over to you.
Do you think any company can ever duplicate Facebook's popularity, or is it one of a kind?
Well, that's a question that comes up a lot. It's something that in the technology industry they are always talking about. And I mentioned, Google. Google is very worried about Facebook because, Google is still the overwhelmingly dominant internet company. they still are the most profitable internet company by far because of what they've been able to do with advertising. But what's happened is Facebook is now the most popular internet company in terms of usage by far. People spend like 3 times as much time on Facebook as they do on Google globally. So, you know, Google is very nervous and is spending tons of money, I don't know how much, but probably hundreds of millions of dollars at least, if not billions, trying to build an alternative to Facebook. And they've bought several companies recently that are in social areas, and they're trying to kind of knit those together in some way, which we don't really know, into some kind of a service. And they may have some success. Again, going back to that point about groups, if somebody comes along and creates a more efficient way to really kind of segregate the kinds of relationships you have and still communicate very freely, I think they could compete somewhat effectively with Facebook. But the caveat there is that Facebook is so big. There's, you know, when you have 550 million people already in a system, it just doesn't go away very fast. You know, you just don't see big things go away fast. I mean, that's been true for a long time. I mean, people were sending telegrams until like 10 years ago, you know? So I think Facebook ultimately will be replaced by something. Everything always gets replaced eventually. But I think it's going to take a long time for anybody to really displace it.
How
There's a bunch of hands up above.
How do they make their money?
Oh, with advertising. And they do it with advertising mostly inside the confines of Facebook in the same way that I described would happen if they went outside. So in other words, they know who you are, they know your age, your gender, your relationship status, where you live, and a lot of, you know, music you like, you know, et cetera, the music your friends like. And they sell ads, and they show those ads to you based on the information they know about you. Which is why it often, if you're on Facebook, you don't see a lot of ads because Facebook really, Mark Zuckerberg hates ads, and he has kept the ads on Facebook to a minimum. But the ads you do see there are often weirdly interesting or weirdly pertinent to something you're doing, and it's because they know who you are. Now, what's often misunderstood is they don't tell the advertiser who you are. All they do to the advertiser is they say, you know, we'll sell you an ad that we will only show to 57-year-old men who live south of 14th Street in Manhattan, you know, that kind of thing. But it's a very effective thing, and actually where advertising on Facebook is most effective and most often used, and this is not widely known, is for small businesses. And if you're a local business, you can buy ads on Facebook that can be extraordinarily effective because of the targeting ability. You can target by geography, by age, by all kinds of things. So I was giving a talk similar to this at the Louisville Public Library in Kentucky. And I said this, and some guy raises his hand and says, I'm a LASIK surgeon. I built my entire business on Facebook advertising. And he just advertises in certain neighborhoods in Louisville to people of a certain age who are likely to need LASIK surgery, and it works.
First off, thank you for coming.
Hold up the mic.
But my question kind of refers to her, but with 550 million plus users, how does Facebook use that for financial leverage in continuing to grow? I know that's probably a big part of their business model with the users, and how do they use that for financial leverage and continuing to grow to meet the needs that they want to meet?
There's more people they can show ads to. I mean, the more people they have, the more ads they can sell, and the more effectively they can go to an advertiser and say, you know, whoever you want to reach, we've got them. And in fact, you know, what's happening in the ad industry, and I'm sure some people in here are in the ad industry, is that, you know, historically the lion's share of spending in advertising has been on TV in the last few decades. And in fact, what's happened with Facebook, so, you know, internet generally, but specifically with Facebook, is a lot of the time that people, particularly younger people, used to spend watching TV, they now spend looking at their computer using Facebook. So if you're an advertiser, you have to go where the eyeballs are. And increasingly, they are not on TV, they are on Facebook. And in addition, when you go to Facebook, you can target people very effectively, which advertisers love. So, you know, it's a big thing. Now, the one negative is that Facebook's growth in places like Indonesia or Venezuela doesn't really do them a whole lot of good in the near term because there's very, very undeveloped internet advertising markets in those countries. So basically, in Indonesia, there essentially is no real internet advertising market, and yet they're supporting 30 million users there. And in the long run, they think it's worthwhile because they believe eventually these tools that are prevalent in the developed world are inevitably moving to these other parts of the world. And you know, if you're an Indonesian business person, as the numbers of users of the internet there grow, you will move there. But you know, it's a little bit of a gamble for them to be accepting so many users in these places where there's no market. But they've got so many users also in the UK and the US and Canada and Germany, so that they're still paying the bills.
Just have time for a couple more questions. And Andrew, do you have one here? Yep.
On Facebook, there are some groups that you can join, but when you go to join them, it makes you take a survey, and there's no way to get past it. Do you know what that is?
I wouldn't join those groups. If they're forcing you to do something like that and it feels even the slightest bit weird, just, you know, close the window.
Yeah, because it's the same exact survey for every single group.
Well, then don't join that group. I don't know about that, but look, you know, there's a lot of people trying to use Facebook for all kinds of things, not all of which are great. I mean, one of the things I say is that when you have 550 million people doing anything, you have a lot of evil, immoral, criminal people among, you know, like 500 million is going to include literally every type of person that exists. So there's all kinds of nasty people doing stuff in there too, and you've got to really realize that and be careful. How old are you, by the way? How long have you been on Facebook?
Like a year, maybe.
Did you join before you were 13? I can tell by your face.
I have the right to remain
you know,
silent.
This is an interesting thing. Facebook is, according to the terms of service, you can't use Facebook until you're 13. But what's happened, partly because of the success of gaming, is that it's become very, very common for young people as young as 8 to be using Facebook. And that's kind of scary because, you know, it is a place of all these weird connections with other people, and you know, parents really have to be aware of what's happening with their kids. I mean, 13-year-olds are great on Facebook, but you know, 8-year-olds, no.
Next question. The gentleman's had his hand up for a long time.
I was encouraged to go on Facebook through humanevents.com.
Say it again?
I was encouraged to join Facebook through humanevents.com. And are you related to Jean Kirkpatrick?
No.
I was going to say,
thankfully, because I always disagree with everything she ever said. But anyway,
would you be to the right of center?
I'm not on the same part of center as she is.
You know, okay.
Well, she's dead, of course. You know. She was actually married into the Kirkpatrick
Obviously,
family.
they know who I am and what I think about.
Yeah.
Because they're the ones. You know, it's really pervasive, but I think it's good.
Well, it is. You know, I mean, their communities are developing around every issue on Facebook. I mean, what some people may have noticed is Sarah Palin is one of the most active users of Facebook. So when Sarah Palin first used the term death panel, it was on Facebook. That's where that word came from. It's Facebook. And this is not just a US phenomenon. The president of Nigeria, who has this wonderful name, Good Luck Jonathan, who was appointed to fill the position after somebody else died, just announced that he's unexpectedly going to run for office to be elected. You know, he's going to run in the elections to run for president of Nigeria. And in Nigeria, how did the president announce that he's going to run for re-election? On Facebook. I mean, get your head wrapped around this thing. It's much bigger than meeting at the mall.
Yep. David, thank you so much. We can continue.
Thank you.
We can continue the conversation outside, where I hope that you'll all buy copies of David's book and ask him to sign them. And they are available at a discount out in the lobby, and there are also refreshments.